Before we begin tonight's meeting, I would like to welcome everyone to our virtual meeting, and I would like to explain this meeting format. Tonight, we have our City Council members with us and staff visible on a live video feed. Members of the public have been invited to comment on Wheat Ridge Speaks in advance of the meeting or to participate live through a web link or by calling in on the telephone. All members of the public who are participating live have been muted at this time. When the time for citizens' right to speak comes, I will unmute all members of the public and I will ask you to speak in order based on the first letter of your last name. Further instructions will be provided at that time. When we unmute the public, please keep background music and noise to a minimum. You may choose to mute yourself through your own device if you do not plan to speak at the meeting. We recommend you simply view the meeting by watching live on Channel 8 or wheatridgespeaks.org. If you do plan to speak this evening, when you speak, please clearly state your first and last name, please spell your last name, and give your street address for the record. Because of this virtual format, I will request from council a motion to waive council rules so we may receive public comment on both agenda items and non-agenda items at the same time during citizens' right to speak. That we limit public comments to 3 minutes per speaker for both agenda and non-agenda items, and that we do not permit the donation of time to another speaker. When there are no more speakers, I will close the time for public comment and public participants will be muted. We appreciate your patience with this virtual format. Our staff and counselors have rehearsed this, and we hope that it's a success for everyone. With our in-person meetings, we hope that we create a friendly and respectful atmosphere for all public dialogue. And we appreciate your help in making this all possible. Thank you. I will now call to order the City Council meeting for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for March the 30th, 2020. You will now see an image of our flag on the screen appear. When it does, I ask you to stand as you are able and join with me for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will ask the clerk to call the roll of the members.
Ms. Hoppy.
Present.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Here.
Mr. Urban.
Present.
Ms. Holteen.
Present.
Ms. Weber.
Here.
Mr. Stikes.
Here.
Ms. Dozman.
Here.
Ms. Nosler Beck.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, all 8 members of the council are present. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We have a proclamation tonight to proclaim the 2020 census, the Complete Count campaign. We have with us Lily Griego and Christian Blessington. And if I would ask our staff to bring them in if they are able.
Thank you, Mayor, for having us tonight, Christian.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead with the proclamation. This is a proclamation for the 2020 Census, the Complete Count campaign. Whereas April 1st, 2020 is Census Day for the United States of America, pursuant to Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution. And whereas an accurate census is required for the proper allocation of representatives within the legislative bodies of the United States House of Representatives and the Colorado State Legislature, and is used as the redistricting of voting districts. And whereas correct apportionment of federal dollars for health, education, transportation, child and elder care, emergency preparation and resources, public and social support programs of all types, and kinds depends upon complete and accurate age, population, and other ethnic and demographic information gathered every 10 years. And whereas accurate census information is critical to planning for future growth, development, and social needs of the city of Wheat Ridge, and whereas Census Day is April 1st, 2020, and whereas Wheat Ridge residents are encouraged to participate in the city of Wheat Ridge's response rate challenge to beat the 2010 census count by 3% by April 30th, meaning that at least 3,185 should be counted by April 30th. And whereas invitations to respond to the 2020 census have been delivered to each housing unit, including for the first time, a way to respond online, and each response should take less than 10 minutes. Now, therefore, be it resolved that on behalf of the City Council, I, Bud Starker, Mayor of the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado, by virtue of the authority vested in me, do hereby proclaim April 1st, 2020 Census Day and encourage all Wheat Ridge residents to complete the 2020 census by April 30, 2020 to ensure that all Wheat Ridge residents are counted. Witness thereof in this 30th day of March 2020, Bud Starker, Mayor. So I would, not a lot of applause now, but I'm sure there's, and I would like to turn this over to Lily Griego with the United States Service. Lily, can you say a few words for us?
First of all, I want to say thank you. I literally was in two places at once. I'm trying to find silver linings and things. So if you heard me or saw me pull my earbuds out, I just finished a teletown hall with 70,000, I think they said, invitees and 7,000 callers with Congressman Ed Perlmutter. And so I was trying to be with you all. And as a Wheat Ridge resident for almost 20 years, I believe, this is exciting. I'm very excited, and I see lots of familiar faces and faces that I'm very pleasantly excited to see in computer doing what we can to keep things normal. So the congressman just spoke about keeping some sense of normalcy. I also want to express extreme gratitude. Christian Blessington works for me, and he's on the Colorado team. We have 30 members of the Colorado team, and you all have just been amazing. Your team has been amazing. Christian speaks very highly of the work in the city of Wheat Ridge. And I just saw the t-shirt for Wheat Ridge, and I feel bad I didn't put it on. So we got that over today. Yes. So I just want to express that I also have, that's fantastic. Everybody has them. I want to express our extreme gratitude that the city of Wheat Ridge, your elected officials, your staff has recognized the importance of the 2020 census in bringing $675 billion back to local communities every single year. We also have the opportunity to possibly, I just said this on the Congressional 7 call, possibly get another congressional seat in Colorado. The population projections predict that that's what's going to happen, but we don't know anything until we see the final count. And I did mention, given this global pandemic, we just don't know what the future holds and what our numbers are going to look like across the country. So that's determined by population count. And so Colorado had for a very long time just been looking at what our numbers would look like. I think given the global pandemic, we are now looking at what our country looks like. In addition to that, this means local funding for things that Wheat Ridge residents count on every single day: education, health, our rec centers, anything that we touch as we walk outside the door, to include the apartments and the multifamily housing dwelling that we have seen a boom and bust in, most recently a boom in Wheat Ridge. I think that we all appreciate the importance of being counted. And it's never been easier to fill out the census other than the 2020 census online, by phone, or by mail. So I just want to extend huge congratulations for the proclamation. We're so honored and proud to work with you and call you our partners. But I also want to extend a huge thank you to everyone for all you've done.
Well, thank you very much for all of your work with the census. Thank you for working with our Wheat Ridge Complete Count Committee. I'd like to recognize their efforts in our city. They've been very active over the past almost year, and I think they've done a marvelous job. We're looking for a lot of activity in our count, a very full count. I want to say that I completed the census the other day, and it was a breeze. It was truly easy to do, and I felt secure and safe doing it, and it was great to do. So anyway, I hope all our citizens will take this to heart. Will after this meeting, fill out their census form and get it in, and let's everybody get counted. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and continue your good work. Let us know if we can do anything else for you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
we'd
Mr.
like to
Goff.
get a screenshot of everybody holding their shirts up again. So if you have a shirt, if you hold it up for a few seconds, we're going to get a picture. Perfect. Got it, Ally? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Goff. Thank you, Ms. Griego.
Thank you so much.
Whoops. We lost council member Hulteen too, so we'll try to get her back here.
Okay, let's while she's doing that, let's see if we could go on to the approval of the minutes. Is she back with us? Not yet. Counselors, in your packet, let's wait a minute for Ms. Hulteen and see if she can get back on. I'm not sure where she might have gone.
Mr. Mayor, this is Ally Sheck, Admin Services. I'll try Ms. Hulteen by phone.
Okay, if you'll do that by phone, I think we'll move on to the, we'll take a look at the minutes. I know there were a couple of corrections. You have before you the City Council minutes of March 9th, 2020, and the City Council minutes of what's called the Emergency Special City Council meeting of March 13th. Did we have any corrections from council on these minutes? And I had one correction that I wanted to make on the City Council minutes of the emergency special session of March 13th was not an emergency special session, just a special session. So if you would, Mr. Clerk, make that notation on there.
Ms. Mayor.
See, I don't see Ms. Hulteen.
I should be on. Can you hear me?
I hear you, yes.
Okay, yep.
Okay, are you joining us by audio?
For some reason, the Zoom meeting is not connecting on my computer, so I've called in on my phone.
Okay, we will note that and move on from there. If you have any other issues, please let us know.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will move to the approval of the agenda. Are there any corrections? And I understand that Ms. Hoppy, you had something that you wanted to add into the agenda.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I don't have something to add into the agenda, but when we do get to citizens' right to speak, I have a motion to read about council rules suspension.
Very good. Mr. Urban, did you have something you wanted to add into the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to add an item at the end of the agenda to place a 30-day ban effective on April 1st on short-term rentals within the city of Wheat Ridge.
Okay. Without objection, we will add that to the agenda. We are now at citizens' right to speak. We have waived council rules to provide comment now on both agenda and non-agenda items.
Mr. Mayor, I need to make the motion. I need to make the motion first.
I'm not ready for the motion yet.
Oh, okay. You said we have already done, so I'm sorry.
Oh.
I apologize to interrupt.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Let me go to Ms. Hoppy then. That's my order that I want to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that council rules be waived in tonight's meeting to for the following reasons. 1, receive public comment on both agenda items and non-agenda items during citizens' right to speak. 2, that we limit public comment to 3 minutes per speaker for both agenda and non-agenda items. And 3, that we do not permit the donation of time to other speakers.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Urban. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we will now poll the council, and I think we were going to raise hands, and we'll have to include Ms. Hulteen as a voice vote. So if you're in favor of the motion, please raise your hand and let the clerk count the votes. And Ms. Hulteen, how do you vote, aye or nay?
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. Now we have waived the council rules to provide comment now on both agenda items and non-agenda items. Please limit comments to 3 minutes per speaker, and we are not allowing donation of time. If you are a member of the public and wish to speak during our meeting, now is the time to speak. We will not have another time for public comment during the meeting. The public's microphones are now being unmuted. If you are not speaking, please mute your telephone. I will invite members of the public to speak based upon the first letter of your last name. When I come to your position in the alphabet, please ask to be recognized and I will recognize you. When I recognize you to speak, please clearly state your first and last name, spell your last name, and give your street address for the record. The comments are limited to 3 minutes. Our timing will be performed by Mayor Pro Tem Hoppe. When there are 30 seconds on your time left, she will display on her screen a timing device that's timing down when your time is up. So that will go up at 30 seconds. When it hits to 0, your time is over. And if you would please wrap your remarks up, that would be great. We'll go on to the next speaker. Hopefully that was pretty clear. We'll give it a try here. Is there anyone wishing to speak whose last name begins in the alphabet A through E? Please ask to be recognized. I hear none. Is there anyone wishing to speak whose last name begins with F through J?
Yes. This is Ihor Figlis.
Okay, Mr. Figlis, please, you're recognized. Please give us your name and begin.
All right, Ihor Figlis, F-I-G-L-U-S. I live at 9775 West 36th Avenue. I have a comment actually about the format of these meetings and some issues that are coming up. Although, I mean, I was able to sign on and I can participate. I am tech savvy enough to do that. I feel that the majority of the public, really hasn't caught on to this. And unless I know that, like up and down my street, there are people who, if you hold their hand and walk them through it, they'll be able to do it. But until such time, the participation expected through this method is going to be pretty limited. And therefore, I think there are issues that are coming up in the future that the city council should postpone. Namely, I think public hearings on issues like rezonings should be postponed until such time as normal hearings can be made. One of the things about the public, besides this particular technological hurdle, is that people who are accustomed to this, especially community planning, Wheat Ridge City, and so forth, who are doing presentations, they have the wherewithal. They are able to put together the PowerPoint presentation or whatever it is that's going to be presented, whereas the majority of the public is really unable to do that, and they rely on the actually being able to come to the city council chambers and to present themselves and to see everybody face to face. And I think that this medium of doing it online, I mean, I think it's great that you can do this, but I think that it's still in its infancy and it really doesn't provide enough access to citizens. You saw yourself that Ms. Hultin had to drop out because of her technical difficulties. I have heard that also from one of my neighbors down the street, who said that especially now with the use of the internet resources, that her connection is often unstable and she gets dropped out of these types of meetings that they've tried to do for her work and so forth. So like I said, I propose that the city council postpone any issues that require public hearing until at least some concerted educational effort is made where the public is able to technically participate in this type of format, or until such time as normal public hearings can be held. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak whose last name begins with the letter F through J? Please speak up and I'll recognize you. I don't hear anyone for F through J. Is there anyone wishing to speak whose last name begins with K through O? Is there anyone else wishing to speak whose last name begins with the letter F through J? Recognizing Chris Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to let the council know that a constituent reached out to me today and had similar concerns regarding the accessibility of the public format and the public discussion, and wanted me to convey that message to council that perhaps this format is not as accessible to the average citizen. And they also requested that certain types of decisions be delayed until a more normal format could be put in place.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Is there anyone else who would like to speak whose last name begins with the letters K through O? Is there anyone tonight wishing to speak whose last name begins with the first letter P through T? Paul through Thomas. Please speak and I'll recognize you. I don't hear anyone. Is there anyone wishing to speak whose last name begins with the letter U through Z? Please ask to be recognized and I will recognize you. I do not hear anyone. Now, is there anyone out there from the public who has not spoken tonight who would like to speak during this citizen's right to speak? Please speak up and I'll recognize you. I'm not able to hear anyone. Is there anyone that would like to speak who hasn't spoken who would like to be recognized? Please speak now. Okay, well, I don't hear anyone else that wants to speak, so I'm going to close the citizen's right to speak at this time. Thank you. Okay, before we continue on with our agenda, I would like to explain how we will vote on items tonight. Once we have a motion and a second, all council members in support of the motion will be asked to raise their hands and keep them raised visibly until the clerk acknowledges that he has recorded those votes. The clerk will then ask any counselor who is opposed to the motion to raise their hands and count the no votes, and then he will ask for any members abstaining. The clerk will tally the votes and then read the results of the votes. This will be our protocol for tonight, and if we are not able to do that, we will move to a roll call poll vote of the members. Okay, we will now continue with our agenda. The consent agenda, we have none. We do not have any public hearings and ordinance on second reading tonight. We do not have any ordinances on first reading. We do have decisions, resolutions, and motions. And number one, Ms. Hoppy, would you please introduce number one?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd be happy to. I do want, there's Ms. Nosler Beck. Hello. Item number one, resolution number 17-2020, a resolution amending the fiscal year 2020 general fund budget to reflect the approval of a supplemental budget appropriation in the amount of $15,630 for the purpose of accepting grants for the promotion of the 2020 census. At issue, the 2020 census is an important and significant event, and the U.S. Census Bureau relies on local agencies such as the City of Wheat Ridge to promote the census to its residents. As such, the city has been successful in securing funding to help with the promotion of the census, and this budget supplemental request will be fully offset by grant revenue.
Thank you. Mr. Goff, do we have any further presentation on this?
We don't. Ali Sheck, our Administrative Services Director, is here to answer questions if there is any.
Okay. We have already taken public comment on this, so I will open this up to the floor for questions from counselors. If you have a question, please raise your hand.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir. Mr. Kirkpatrick.
I just received a text message saying that Channel 8 is down and no one off of this call can see what we're doing here or hear us.
Okay, thank you for.
Clerk, I'm not sure what the implications of that are. I just thought you should know.
Mr. Dahl, does this impact our meeting?
Pardon me, no, we've made this meeting available to the public by telephone as well. One thing the council could consider, since I do know that people rely heavily on Channel 8 in the city, you might consider a 5-minute recess for the purpose of seeing if we can get cable Channel 8 back up. I think that might be recommended, especially where the agenda is not particularly heavy, and we likely have the time for that.
Without objection from council, then I will order us a, let's say about an 8-minute meeting. We will reconvene at 7:35.
Zach?
This up to council for questions. Before I ask for a motion. Okay, Ms. Hoppy, may I have a motion on agenda item number 1?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve resolution number 17-2020, a resolution amending the fiscal year 2020 general fund budget to reflect the approval of a supplemental budget appropriation in the amount of $15,630 for the purpose of accepting grants for the promotion of the 2020 census.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Stites. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council? All those in favor, raise your hand.
Ms. Hulteen, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. We'll move to agenda item number 2. Ms. Dozeman, please introduce this item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Resolution number 18-2020, a resolution of the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado, approving the use of electronic consent for signatures on ordinances, resolutions, contracts, and other instruments requiring the city's signature. At issue, the current health emergency COVID-19 is necessitating that city elected officials, staff, and contracted employees work remote. Therefore, it is challenging to procure physical signatures on important documents. This resolution resolves this by allowing for electronic consent for signatures.
Thank you, Mr. Goff or Mr. Dahl. Do we have a presentation on this?
Mr. Dahl may have a few words to say.
Mr. Dahl?
Thank you. This has come up a couple of times since we've had unavailability of people to be able to sign documents, especially the mayor and the city clerk immediately. And other people rely on those signatures, people the city contracts with, other governments, really just anything where there's an instrument that the city needs to execute that then goes to others so that things can be bought and purchased and procured, and we can work with other governments and the various operations of the city can continue. So this resolution allows instruments to be approved electronically simply by an email consent from the required signer, in most cases to the city clerk. And the city clerk's allowed to also consent electronically, so that as soon as those consents are in place, the document is considered effective. And the physical signature can be affixed at a later time, but that doesn't change its effectiveness. And this is something that I think other people are doing. The Secretary of State's office has noticed this and promulgated some regulations around notary certificates. You'll notice that the section 1 of the resolution allows documents that call for a notary to be authenticated by the electronic signature of the city clerk, because that's really what notaries do. They just say that you're affirming the person who signed it is that person. This allows the city's work to continue uninterrupted, and people we work with to rely on the actions the city takes in an uninterrupted way.
Thank you. I will open this up for any questions from counselors of staff. Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would this also apply to any documents that citizens are trying to procure, and if they need to sign something electronically, whether that's permits or I'm not sure what that might necessitate, but I've had a constituent ask about that.
Mr. Dahl.
By its terms, it doesn't, all it does is electronically authenticate or allow the electronic signature of documents by city officials. There's no reason that it couldn't be broadened, and I'm happy to help council with that as an amendment to include that documents to be filed with the city can be filed electronically. I'd like to carve out from that documents filed with the municipal court. I think the municipal court's dealing with this issue separately, and I wouldn't want to have the council's kind of changing the rules for criminal procedure. But we certainly could, when the appropriate time comes for action, I can suggest an additional sentence or additional section that would allow citizens to file documents electronically without the requirement of a physical signature.
Thank you.
Thank you. Additional discussion?
Mr. Mayor, is that?
Mr. Urban?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would that be, do we need to make that amendment right now, or would that just be?
Well, I think it'd be appropriate for us to put a motion on the table, and then we could amend it at that time.
Okay.
We currently don't have a motion on the table, but if there's no further discussion, I will ask Ms. Dozeman to provide us with a motion, please.
I move to approve resolution number 18-2020, a resolution of the city of Wheat Ridge, Colorado, approving the use of electronic consent for signatures on ordinances, resolutions, contracts, and other instruments requiring the city's signature.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Urban, and now is there discussion on the motion?
I move to amend the motion to include signatures by resident or by citizens and non-city officials.
Second.
Okay, could we, as part of that, go to Mr. Dahl first and see if that's good language, or do we need to wordsmith that any?
I suggest that the language that Council Member Urban is wanting to add would be a new sentence at the end that would say, documents and other instruments filed by citizens requiring signature may be similarly filed and electronically approved.
Except as related to the courts, or do you need that?
Except
caveat?
yes, thank you. Except as related to filings in the municipal court. Thank you.
So moved.
That captures your amendment, and Mr. Stites, is that good on your second?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's fine.
Okay, now we will have a discussion on the amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council on the amendment?
Ms. Hulteen.
You should be able to see her.
Oh, sorry. Welcome back. Mr. Mayor, the amendment has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. Now, do we have additional discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council? All those in favor, raise your hand.
Mr. Mayor, the motion has also passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. We will now move to agenda item number 3. Ms. Weaver, would you please introduce agenda item number 3?
I would be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a motion to approve revisions to the City of Wheat Ridge Emergency Operations Plan. The Emergency Operations Plan for the City of Wheat Ridge was reviewed and required updating to clearly define the roles and responsibilities of each governing entity within the city revisions. So they also more closely align with other local, state, and federal guidelines for emergency response to natural and person-made disasters.
Thank you very much. Mr. Goff, do you have a presentation on this of any type?
We have our Chief Murtha on and Commander Sulzer, and I would ask them to provide any additional comments.
Okay, Chief Murtha and Commander Sulzer, thank you for joining us today. Is there any additional information you'd like to provide to the council at this time?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Only to add that the changes were very minor and really related to logistical issues. I'll let Commander Sulzer comment on any specifics around that, but I believe these are did not in any way really change the ultimate goal of this document from our perspective. But I'll ask Commander Sulzer to comment as well, since she worked on this document and completed it.
Commander Sulzer.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Primarily, the revisions, again, were just formatting issues and, again, aligning our plan with those of local, state, and federal agencies for emergency management, and also to add information specifically related to contracting agencies such as the victim advocates, as well as reestablishing all of our roles. The roles of the County Office of Emergency Management to ensure that we are still following along with the things that they would be responsible for during a natural disaster or a pandemic.
Thank you. And I want to sort of point out that we've got in our packet material here a good 150-page document that's very detailed and looks to be a very good emergency response report. You know, you always hope you never need these things, but it's good to have them when you need them, and it's good to have them now. So thank you very much for putting this work in, and I would like to open it up to council for any questions or comments they have for our staff on that. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is this plan currently being used by city staff, and is it a productive element of our planning and organization around emergency management?
Mr. Urban, in many ways it is. We do follow these guidelines. However, this is certainly a living document that only offers guidelines. We're in a unique situation, one that I would suggest to you was not a focus of this document when it was created. However, there are elements of this document that we have incorporated in our current planning and operational aspects of what we are currently facing with the coronavirus crisis. So in many ways, we are following this document, but of course, we're adapting as we go along and changing our posture in response to the way things are moving nationally and locally.
Thank you. I would just ask us at some point, let's say 6 months after this is ended, if we're able to take a look at either this document or our overall posture and strategy relating to emergency management, so that we can, as we all talk about uncharted territories, once we've charted this territory, we're able to look back and figure out how do we address or what could we do better. And now is not the time to do that. But at some point in the future, I'd like to see us be able to kind of look back and say, this is what we've learned from this, because it is, something we didn't anticipate.
Yeah, and let me just comment really quickly on that, sir. Actually, Commander Salser, almost from day one, started that conversation, and we have been documenting and tracking our new direction here so that we can make sure that we capture this for any future events. Hopefully, it's not in my lifetime, but some future generation can look back on this and be able to learn from what we've learned in this one. But all credit to Commander Salser for being forward leaning on this one.
Great.
Thank you. Additional discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Weaver, a motion is in order.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve the revisions to the City of Wheat Ridge Emergency Operations Plan.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Weaver, a second by Ms. Hoppy. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Chief and Commander Salzer, for for coming tonight and joining us and for bringing us this report. And thank you very much for your work in keeping our community safe. We appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now move to agenda item number 4. Mr. Urban, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion is approving funding for Wheat Ridge Business Recovery Program in response to the COVID-19 and Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment Public Health Order 20-22. At issue is the impact of COVID-19 on American businesses has increased dramatically over the last 2 weeks as state and local governments order mandatory shutdowns and shelter-in-place orders, further complicating operations for businesses already impacted by COVID-19. On March 16, 2020, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment issued a Public Health Order 2022, which closed bars, restaurants, theaters, gymnasiums, and casinos through April 30th, 2020.
Thank you. This is will be a motion when it's made a motion. Mr. Goff, do you have a presentation on this item?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We also have Steve Art, our economic development manager, is also here, and Chris Miller, our city treasurer, will also provide comments during the presentation. I apologize, I'm going to be looking away from the camera here at my notes, but we'll try to make eye contact when I can. So as you're all aware, and as Mr. Urban just read in the council action form, staff did receive direction from City Council at our last meeting to bring back an amount of money that the city would be able to potentially appropriate for a financial package to support businesses impacted by COVID-19. and more specifically, the state health order that Mr. Urban mentioned in the council action form. Staff has been working on financial modeling to determine what impacts COVID-19 is going to have on the city of Wheat Ridge. And as I think you all know, 70% of the city's revenues today come from sales and use tax, and that's going to be that revenue source is going to be greatly reduced during this event. Other revenue sources such as lodgers tax, building division fees, and our parks and recreation fees will also have be impacted because of this event. We created 3 scenarios, and also Mark Colvin, our finance manager, is also on the call. And if you have any questions for him specifically, he helped put these scenarios together, so he's available to answer any questions. But we did create some different scenarios, and I actually want to share this up on the screen so our public can see it and city council can see it. This is just out of the, let's see, I think I got the wrong, nope, there we go. Okay, I'll just go down to this. This is in the staff report that went out to city council and to citizens, but this is a table of different scenarios that we put together to look at the, again, potential impacts to the city due to this event. Scenario A in this chart is essentially the best case scenario, and up to scenario C we think is potentially the worst case scenario. It, you know, hopefully it doesn't get worse than that. We just don't know at this time. And I just want to caveat all of this that we're talking about this evening. There's a lot of unknowns, and we're very early on into this. And these are estimates and projections based on what we're hearing. These scenarios that we put together are very similar to what many other cities are looking at also. And you know, where we land in the end on this really depends on how long this outbreak lasts, and how long the mandatory public health orders are in place. Then also how deep this drives the economy into a recession. So all those things we need to continue to monitor and track over the next several months to determine the long-term impacts of this. So we're looking at anywhere between a 12% reduction in total general fund revenues in 2020, anywhere up to potentially 32% of our general fund revenues in 2020. And I'm not going to go through all these assumptions. We can talk about it if you have questions, but you can see it there on the screen. Again, the assumption scenario A is the impact or the COVID-19 event is shorter lived, and people get back to shopping and eating at restaurants a lot sooner. Then when you move on up to scenario B and C, we increase those assumptions so that this event lasts longer throughout the year, and the recession potentially becomes deeper, and people aren't shopping sooner than later. So those are all the assumptions that we put together. I asked staff several weeks ago to start thinking about budget cuts to help mitigate some of this. And in your staff report here, we summarized what types of cuts staff came up with. I asked them to look at all funds, not just the general fund. But at this point, we came up with potentially just over $5 million that could potentially be cut. You can see some different categories there. That these budget cuts come from hiring freezes, cuts to conference and training expenses, office supplies, fleet replacement, forestry services, facility repairs and improvements, contractual services. We had $175,000 budgeted in 2020 for the 44th Avenue Corridor Sub-Area Plan. We're suggesting that we put that on hold. Street preventative maintenance and repairs to bridges, improvements to and building security at our city facilities, some projects in the open space budget, including an open space management plan and redevelopment of the green on 38th Avenue, are all items that we've identified as potential cuts. So even before the city, even before COVID was an issue, we were looking at our budget and looking for areas that we could projects we could defer in 2020, and potentially projects we could eliminate, because we have a couple other city financial obligations that we need to make sure that we can take care of in this next year or two. And those projects are, the first one is the I-70 hook ramp project. I think we might have to give a little bit of background on this and can answer some questions. We have a fairly new council. So a lot of this project, the I-70 hook ramp project, was decisions were made from previous council. So the current council may not know all the ins and outs of this, but essentially the project at this point, the I-70 hook ramp project, is about $17.5 million. We have we have $10 million available in the city's 2E bond fund that goes toward that project. But we entered into an agreement with the developer of this site that the city would pay the difference between the project costs and the 10 million. And then the city would be reimbursed once the developer issues bonds for the project. At this point, the developer has not issued bonds. We're hoping they're going to do it this year. And we are pretty close, if not a little bit over the 10 million in expenditures at this point. So we are starting to needing to dip into general fund reserves to continue paying for this project. The project has probably another 18 months before it's completed. So the full difference between the 10 million and the 17.5 million will not all come at once. It'll be expended over the next year and a half. So we're going to have to figure out how to cash flow that project also. So as I mentioned before, we've been looking at other budget cuts also to deal with this obligation. And now we have the COVID issue on top of that. The second project that we have a financial obligation for in the next couple of years is the Wadsworth Improvement Project. It's estimated that project is about $45 million. And we have enough grants and other funding to cover the 45 million, but the project hasn't been bid out yet. This project will be bid out this summer. And we just don't know if 45 million is going to be the actual number. It could be higher, could be lower. But if it's higher, we're going to have to find the additional sources of revenue to cover that difference. And then also, most of this $45 million is going to be reimbursed to the city through federal grants through CDOT. However, those grants reimbursements take sometimes up to 4 months. So we're estimating that the city, once this project is under construction, the city is potentially going to have to cash flow about $4 million at any one time until we receive reimbursement for those grants. So that's just another obligation I want to make sure City Council understands that we have in the next couple of years with these two projects. So talking about general fund reserves now, on how all this impacts our reserves. Our 2020 budget was adopted with a projection of general fund reserves of just under $10 million. That's based on what we're budgeted for expenditures and revenues in 2020. So we know that's probably going to change. But of this amount, of this 10 million, 7.5 million are considered unrestricted reserves, meaning City Council can use those funds for anything they would like. And an additional almost 1.2 million of that 10 million is restricted for emergencies. We are required by state law to hold back 3% of our annual general fund expenditures for emergencies, and that's what's called the Tabor Reserve. So those dollars are available to be spent during this emergency time too. And the emergency declaration that City Council passed a week or so ago allows me as city manager to dip into those emergency funds for COVID-related expenses. If you all remember, we have a general fund reserve policy that requires that City Council maintain a minimum 17% undesignated reserve balance. And again, as I mentioned above, the 2020 budget was adopted with projecting for just about a 19% reserve. The table on the screen that you see in front of you shows how each of the scenarios that we put together will have an impact, what kind of impact those scenarios will have on our reserves. So under each scenario, again, our current reserves, undesignated reserves right now are 7.4 million. Scenario A, we're projecting to lose about 4.5 million in revenues in 2020. So that decreases our reserves to 2.9 million, which is at 6.6%. So in order to get us back up to 17% reserves, we would need to cut from our general fund budget about $4.5 million. Then you can see the same thing for scenario B and scenario C, which are much larger deficits. Almost done here, and we can take questions. But also a little bit more background. The good news with some of this is that the federal government and state governments are reacting fairly quickly. And there's been a number of programs that have been adopted to help with our business sector. And I won't go through all these again, but this US Senate recently passed the CARES Act, which does provide a significant amount of money to small and large businesses to help with payroll and other expenses. And the good news is with one of these payback protection programs is the loan is forgivable if the businesses keep on their employees that they currently have hired. So there's some good resources here. There's some individual tax relief. There's enhanced unemployment benefits that are being provided. The Small Business Association has economic injury disaster loans. Colorado Department of Labor and Employment has a work share program to keep employees hired, but maybe at not as many hours per week. And then there's several other different programs across the country from different groups. Locally here, Local Works has their board recently approved a new loan program to help with expenses that are related to COVID for our businesses. It's a low interest loans they're interest free actually for up to 36 months and up to a maximum of $5,000. And I believe Kate Cook, our executive director of Local Works, is on the call. She could answer any questions you may have about that. The last time I checked, I think they have 5 applications for that money at this point. And also the city, Steve Art and the city has been working very closely with our Wheat Ridge.
They have 5, how many did you say they have?
The last I heard, they had 5 applications so far. And Steve Art's been working very closely with our Wheat Ridge Business Association and Chamber of Commerce and creating business toolkits. And if you go on the website, we can bring that up here on the screen in a bit if you'd like, but created again a business toolkit that has many resources for our businesses that they can find different resources for them. We've also created an Eat Ridge website that is promoting our restaurants and bars that are currently serving for takeout, and they're also working on a Biz Ridge site that is going to promote other types of businesses that are still also providing service during this shutdown. So we're trying to promote our local businesses as much as possible, and also provide them with the resources that they need to provide some financial assistance. So in wrapping up, and then I'll turn it over to, I think Chris Miller may have a few things, and we'll see if Steve Art has anything. I think we need to be very cautious and very prudent during this time. I'm a little nervous of the long-term impacts that this is going to have on our local finances. There's just, I think, too many unknowns at this time to make too many big decisions. However, I do know City Council has a desire to help our businesses as much as possible and as quickly as possible. So I think our budget could handle potentially up to $250,000 immediately to put into some type of business recovery program. And I think we could absorb that at this point, and then keep an eye on the economy and our budget and our revenues over the next several months. And we can always come back and look at additional assistance if we think we can do that. With that, Mr. Miller, are you still on? I'll stop
here. Thank you.
Stop sharing this. Chris, do you have something?
Oh, yes, I wanted to kind of add on to what Patrick said a little bit and remind the council, give you an update. Might be more appropriate of a word, but at the last meeting I had mentioned that I was working with the city team to develop a program for businesses in Wheat Ridge to request an extension to pay their sales tax. We've moved forward with that, and we have put a form on the website, on the city website, under the business. Oh, sorry, I just lost it. I'll bring it up in a moment, but essentially businesses can request an extension to pay their March, April, and May sales tax for a 90-day deferment. This process does not waive the sales tax that's due. It only waives the payment for an additional 90 days. As you know, or many of you may know, the IRS is giving individuals an extra 90 days to file their tax return. The state of Colorado is doing the same. I reached out to some other municipalities, Golden, Arvada, Lakewood. They all are providing similar programs in their municipalities in order to provide some relief for business owners who are directly affected by this. I've asked the city team to pull some numbers. It looks like there's about almost 1,000 businesses in the city that would qualify for this. Of course, we wouldn't let somebody like King Soopers, who's doing very well, give them an extension to pay, but we would look at the smaller businesses, especially in the food service industry, the bars, the taverns, gymnasiums, and there's also some small businesses in the retail sector that have been greatly impacted. So we hope that this program will provide a little bit of relief and give them some extension. At this point, it's about keeping everybody afloat, giving them a little bit of cash flow to keep them going and hopefully keep their employees employed at this time. So I just wanted to give you all an update on that. I've also looked at the payments that have come in to try to estimate the impact. At this point, I think I'd agree with Patrick, the city manager, that it's just far too soon to tell. We've only received about 93 last sales tax returns at this point over the same period last year, and that equated to about $100,000 reduction in payments. So this really didn't get rolling until about mid-March. So we won't know a heck of a lot about the sales tax impact until the March returns are due on April 20th. So I really want to echo what Patrick said. I think it's a little bit too early to really measure how much this is going to be an impact. I feel that the estimations of the finance team are more than reasonable. I've looked at the numbers, and that kind of is lining up with what I'm seeing. As you know, I work for the city of Denver, and we're seeing similar things. A few years ago in the Great Recession, we had double-digit declines in our sales tax revenues, and that led to things such as reduced hours at libraries, reduced hours at DMVs, furloughs, layoffs, and so forth. This is not good. So I think that everything that the city's putting into place now, they're, I would say, tapping the brakes. They're not slamming on the brakes yet. They're doing the right thing. They're identifying things that can be deferred. A hiring freeze, I think, is a great idea. And I just want to say that I really support the city's measures, but we need to continue to monitor the situation because If it gets worse, then we may have to think about doing some things as rescinding some budgets in order to live within our goals with respect to our undesignated fund balance and so forth. So with that, I will find that website, but I'll give it back to Patrick and Steve.
Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to throw up real quick a screenshot. This is the webpage that Steve Art has been working on with our Wheat Ridge Business Association and the Chamber. It's really comprehensive. It's got here's the this is the Eat Ridge portion that has all the different restaurants and talks about what they're doing or not doing during this time. But then there's also a business toolkit here. I think it will pull up that has links to many, many different resources, financial business resources, employment resources, employer resources. So tons of information there for our businesses. And so please refer any business that you talk to this site. It's basically at www.wheatridgebiz.com, and you should find it there. So with that, I think, Mr. Mayor, we're ready for any questions.
Okay, thank you very, very much for your presentation. I will open it up for questions from council. Please, Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for staff. Would we be able to use these funds for bridge loans? Seeing that there's a lot of available assistance out there, but recognizing that the city could probably be a little bit more nimble and responsive to our own community. Is that an option for us to allocate a portion, not just for direct grant funding, but also to provide bridge loans so that we can actually recycle some of that funds and have the funds go a little bit further?
Sure, definitely. I think the good news is there's this is pretty much a clean slate. We could be very creative with this. A lot of cities, we've been doing a lot of research, and unfortunately, a lot of cities our size currently don't have any really programs in place, but they're all looking at different things. The states and larger cities have very large loan programs that they are providing. It's mainly loans. There's a few grant programs out there too, but so I do believe though in the next week or two, there's going to be more examples from smaller cities, and a bridge loan program could be part of this.
Thank you. Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a couple questions, and I've spoken to a few of you today about it, but who would be in charge of dispersing the funds, or at least do you guys see as being the best entity or city body to do that?
Sure. Again, I think there's numerous options there. I think as long as it doesn't get too complicated with a huge application process, we could handle some in-house. But we also could utilize Local Works to help us. They have experience in this, and maybe our Wheat Ridge Business Association. I think it was Councilmember Hoppy a few days ago, we talked about, we could bring back a citizen committee that we've established to distribute funding to our nonprofits. We could use something like that, that they could put some criteria together and evaluate applications and give funding out too. So I think there's numerous ways, Mr. Stites, we could do this.
Okay. I had a couple suggestions, and Ms. Hoppy and I spoke about it too. The outside agency committee was one that we came up with. The Wheat Ridge Business District, which already gives grants to businesses, would be one suggestion. And then I think there was a hybrid of taking a couple people from the business association, maybe the business district, the chamber, and maybe the mayor or the treasurer, somebody to chair that might be a good idea. And then I would support maybe using some of the funds for, like Ms. Hulteen said, short bridge loans for people waiting to get their funds, but maybe also half or something going to grants, or maybe a mixture of maybe a grant that maybe a 20% grant followed by a loan or something like that that could be paid back. So I wish we could do more, but I agree that this is about the right amount of money to put to this. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll go next to Ms. Hoppy. If you would like to speak, raise your hand and I'll put you on the list. And I've got you, Mr. Urban. Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Patrick, I was wondering, all of these resources that were identified in the staff memo, I just wanted to verify if those have already been added to our city website on a resource page, or are they all through the Eat Wheat Ridge? Like, are there two places or one place where people can look?
Our website is linked, or the Wheat Ridge site is linked to our city website. So if you go to the city website, you can link directly to the business association site that has all these resources on there.
Okay, and so so they're not directly on our website. It's linked to another website.
Correct.
Okay, and then I'd also like to ask for the form to request an extension for 90 days. Is that something that we have been able to do like a social media blast on, or to like kind of get the information out there on that? And here's my concern, is that yes, there are a million links. I've been clicking on links for days and days and days. And the navigation of all of it is hard. And finding what works for your specific business is hard. And so, I just want, putting up a list of links that's great, but there's still, you just get lost in the forest. And so like, if we have something very specific that we're doing, which is like the request for the extension for the 90 days, can we get that out there into our community so that our business community is aware of that and they don't have to go through a list of links to necessarily get that information?
Chris, you want to respond to that?
Yes, I would honestly, I want to make sure I wasn't muted. I would be happy to do that and work with the city staff to make it more accessible. Perhaps I can coordinate with Steve Art to directly communicate with our business community. Facebook sounds like a great option. A lot of information travels awfully fast. So I would love to do that and work with the team in economic development to make sure that everyone is aware of this program.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see I have Mr. Urban down next. If you want to speak, raise your hand. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So about 10 years ago, I was working for the Adams County Housing Authority running their rent assistance program. And there were several criteria that we had when providing rent assistance. And the first criteria we had was that the renter wasn't going to be evicted the day after we provided assistance in paying their rent. And so likewise, as we look at these programs, I want to make sure that the participants in this program aren't going to end up closing or that they're going to be evicted from their place of business, or otherwise it's not going to cause them to be successful. So as much as we don't want a very burdensome application process, I think there's 3 different criteria that I'd like to see. The first being that these businesses are going to survive, or they have some indication that it's from a triage perspective, that it is a survivable event for them, that their landlord isn't going to be evicting them the day after we help them with their rent. So that's the first one. And then if there are hard costs or specific expenses that we could help them with when we're talking about the grants, I think that would be helpful to have the businesses identify specific items if we're talking about grants. When it comes to loans, as a business, we'll give them a loan, they can use that for what they need to do. But when it comes to grants, I think it's better for us to be prudent in saying, well, what is this grant going to be paying for? And then we also want to be helping those that want to help themselves. And so if we can see an indication that they are applying for other programs, whether it be an SBA, they may not receive that other assistance, but we need to see that they are not just turning to us alone for their assistance. We want them to turn to us, but we don't want it to be the only source of their relief. And by requiring additional application with other entities, that make sure that they're as successful as possible. And to Councilmember Stites' point about sort of a mix of 20% in grants and 80% in loans of the 250,000, I think something like that would be appropriate. And as far as the loans, if it were forgivable after a year because the business is still in business within a year, then the loan would be forgiven. But if if they close within a year, the loan would be personally guaranteed by the business owner or something to that effect, because we want to encourage them or to show them that these monies are to make sure that they stick around and that they don't just fold up shop as soon as we provide them with some assistance. So those are my ideas and concerns, and I would agree that $250,000 is an appropriate amount to start with. I'd like us to revisit it at some point when we're able to, and I would agree that it's difficult to tell where we're going to end up with this, but our business community needs to know that we've got their back and that we're able to help them, and it sounds like $250,000 is where we're able to be at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments from Ms. Nosler-Beck.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback on everybody else's comments. I think that it's pretty important for us to establish the criteria, like Council Member Urban was saying, because not only does it help the businesses in Wheat Ridge to have grants available to help right now, but when the SBA, potentially SBA grants or any of these other federal or state programs start either doing grants or loans, if we have a set criteria, that helps make Wheat Ridge businesses more viable and eligible for potential other funding as well. And so sometimes it helps out the SBA if they come in and they can see that the city of Wheat Ridge has already said, this is a business that we've given a loan to our grant, then they consider that an investment, and it helps speed up the process. And so it's getting into how the sausage is made, but 18 months down the road, that's when we're going to be looking back, and that's when this SBA federal dollars will actually start hitting the streets here, hopefully in Wheat Ridge.
Additional comments? Ms. Hulteen and then Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I spent a good part of yesterday and today talking to about 12 different business owners in District 2 just to better understand, what are they doing? What are their immediate needs? What are their longer term concerns? And the hardest position we're all in right now is we have no idea how long this is going to last, what this is going to look like in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. So I really appreciate that we're in a position right now to look at something quick. And I hope that we as a city can leverage the fact that we can work with our local businesses and be quick and nimble in a way that the state and federal government maybe can't be quite as quick with. The thing that I realized after talking with everyone is that, I run a very small business. A lot of us on council actually are business owners. And I realize for me to feel like I have any like real expertise in understanding how to best allocate the funds to whom and what that criteria is, I just realized is pretty complicated. And so one of the things I'd like to consider, based on what Council Member Stites suggested, is could we create a working group that is representative of the business community to best understand their needs and then best represent the city's investment in those needs? And I think, it's hard because a lot of our business members would probably be looking at applying for those funds as well. And so assuring that the city's dollars are being, represented in an unbiased fashion. But, could we look at assembling representatives from, the chamber, business district, local works, the city, to come up, work with Council Member Urban's recommendations on viable business models. Can we do loan forgiveness? What does that look like? I feel like the business community knows itself best, and I'd really like to look to them for their guidance and recommendations so that they can best represent the business community.
Thank you. Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that was, Rachel kind of stole my thunder, but we already had this conversation earlier. So I definitely was going to ask about criteria and whether we would be putting together some sort of committee within the business community and how quick that turnaround would be. And then Mr. Urban touched on the forgiveness, loan forgiveness after a year, but I'd like to make sure that there's a certain percentage that's paid off before we're allowing for full forgiveness. And I love the idea of grants and bridge loans. I think that that would be a good mixture. And I wanted to thank everybody for putting this together and really giving a even though it's not the greatest picture, giving us very conservative numbers to work with so that we can ensure the viability of our city funds, as well as having and giving relief to our businesses. So
Thank you. I have Mr. Urban and then Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is relating to the expenditure of these funds and what criteria, what ability would we have to seek reimbursement of these funds from FEMA or SBA or other federal entities because this is within that emergency declaration? And do we have any idea of how we can craft this so that it is reimbursable by some other entity, or we just are going to expend this without expectation of reimbursement?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mr. Urban. And unfortunately, right now, most of the reimbursement is not to cover any revenue losses that the city has seen that we're hearing from FEMA. It's only covering direct costs to deal with these impacts. So over time of our employees who are working specifically on this issue, any expenses that things that we have to purchase for cleaning or disinfection or anything like that. But right now they're not, at least any of the stimulus packages that have been put out there currently are not providing reimbursement for lost revenues to cities. There is a lot of talk out there that hopefully that they'll look at a fourth potential stimulus package that would potentially include some reimbursement to cover lost revenues. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, but to that point, this $250,000 isn't necessarily to recoup lost revenues. It's to provide direct assistance to those business owners. And when I was overseeing the rent assistance program for Adams County, we would never pay the tenant that rent in hopes that they would pass that along to the landlord. We would get a W-9 directly from the landlord and pay that to that landlord with a written letter back from the landlord saying that they wouldn't evict the person for another 60 days or something like that, because that was the whole point of giving them that money. And that would then be potentially reimbursable because it's a hard cost that we are paying on behalf of somebody else. And so as it relates to grants that we may be doing, I don't know if it's possible to ask business owners to hand us an invoice that they need paid, and we pay that, and that becomes a reimbursable cost that we can seek from some other entity.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Urban. I think we need to do all we can to see if we can get some of this reimbursed, but everything I'm hearing now is these types of expenses won't be reimbursed, but doesn't mean that won't change. Again, I know Congressman Perlmutter and our senators are pushing for reimbursement of these types of expenses. And even the third stimulus package that was passed, the funding that is going to counties and cities, it only goes down to cities of 500,000 or greater, or counties of 500,000 or greater. So we're going to have to apply for the funding that is available through the county. It's not coming directly to us. So they're trying to change that. Also, they're trying to make sure that all entities, doesn't matter on their size, are getting some funding. But I think the good news is, Zach, I think there's a lot of people pushing for better flexibility on the funding and to cover some of our lost revenues. We can look at your suggestion of trying to, like you just said, maybe pay for hard costs, and maybe that would be reimbursable. We'll look into that.
And the reason I say that is that because in the situation everybody is affected, we want to identify for those business owners what are the pinch points and what are the hard costs that have to be paid today, and trying to identify for the business owners how can we help them today, and where do they really need the assistance. Because, for instance, with a property owner who has a mortgage, their mortgage company is going to want to work with them as it stands and deal with that separately, us paying that mortgage isn't in our best interest because the mortgage company has a self-interest in working that out with them as well. So helping us really identify what exactly is the best bang for our buck and expending these monies, and the potentiality of receiving reimbursement is only going to be on that we have specific expenses that if we just give someone $1,000 and hope that they do well with it, we're not going to get reimbursed for that at all.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just, when I first read the memo, I knew that there was going to be a lot of discussion because I read the memo, but then the questions on the end were who and how, right? And so I've been taking a lot of notes, and we've talked, you know, kind of like how it could potentially be, how it could potentially go out, like with, you know, a lot of the suggestions that Councilmember Urban has made about, like, you know, how do we decide who gets the money and that kind of thing. The who we've touched on just a little bit, but Councilmember Hultin and I were talking, and one idea that we had, and so I just kind of want to get this out there so that at some point when we can end this and have moving direction, because you know, we don't want to have to wait until our next business meeting to give staff direction on what to do. And so my goal was to come out of this with actual forward direction. And so one of the things that that we talked about was if we could ask the Wheat Ridge Business District, the Wheat Ridge Chamber, the Wheat Ridge Business Association, and Local Works to each as those entities identify 2 people, one being a board member and one being another person, which could be staff, could be another board member, or if you think about it, the business association and the chamber have really deep benches with probably really good professional players on there, like actual accountants and lawyers. And so if they could identify one person of their membership, but each of those would ask to, you know, donate basically 2 people to the committee, and then we could have our economic development director, Steve Art, on that. And then perhaps you, Mr. Mayor, if you feel like that is something, so that, you know, council has representation on that. So that's kind of like, that's the nuts and bolts of that idea. And I just want to put that out there and see what people think about that, if they think that that's a bad idea, if they have something that they'd like to change to it, you know, something just so that we can make sure we're moving through this meeting and we're getting to an end result, you know, that we can tell our small businesses about.
I want to chime in. I think you've got a great idea to, you know, this is something that we need to move on tonight if we're going to move on, and you know, and have a working group if we're going to have a working group established, you know, be able to make, you know, to move with that and make decisions. I will. Someone else has already brought up that many of the leaders in our community are small business people and are in need of help, and I'm one of them. And so somehow we're going to want to be able to structure a program that you know, that's able to benefit all of us, whether we're you know, members of the, you know, the committee or the community, you know, equally. Additional discussion, Ms. Stosman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I had some similar thoughts. I mean, most of the folks that are on those organizations or in those organizations are business owners themselves that may turn around and want to apply. So just having a really good mixture and making sure that we have staff representation on there, whether that's Steve Art, maybe also our city treasurer, Chris Miller. I mean, I think that we need to have a good mix of people from kind of all walks of our business community, whether that's restaurants, retail, etc. So I know we need to keep that in mind, because I mean, we're basically making and creating a committee that's going to be creating criteria for themselves potentially.
Additional discussion, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To that point about the number of people that are both small business owners and members of the committee, I think it's critical that we have those individuals providing that input. My concern is that as it relates to making those decisions or chairing that it puts conflicts of interest in there. And I would be willing, or maybe Chris Miller would be willing to be the chair of that, because I'm not going to be seeking that assistance. I'm not in a position to seek that. And we just want to make sure that what we're doing has an air of conflict free, so that we're not putting someone in an awkward position of chairing something and then also asking for assistance. And I'm sure there's ways we can work around that, but thinking through that, or if another member that knows right up front they're not going to be seeking that assistance could share that, I just want to throw that out there.
Good. And I think we also need to develop, transparency and fair rules and procedures and stuff, so that what we're doing is above board and we've got good accountability and good transparency. Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I feel like the discussion we're having right now should be after we've made a motion. Have we made a motion on this particular item yet?
We have not. We're still under discussion on the item, but if we think we're ready for a motion, I'm ready to call for one.
Mr. Mayor,
staff question.
Let me go to Mr. Goff and then Ms. Hoppy.
before you make a motion, we probably should have made this a resolution, not a motion, because we need to do a supplemental budget appropriation, and city charter requires that that's done by resolution. Allie, in her greatness and quickness, just created a resolution, and Zach, I emailed it to you. I'm not sure if you have your city email open.
Yeah, let me pull that up here. One second.
So if that's okay with council, and I asked Mr. Dahl, he said it was fine, we could change this from a motion to a resolution, so that we're making sure that we're doing this appropriately.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you. And I wonder if what we should do is move on to the resolution, but then, which means that we will be putting the funds into a business recovery program, but then do we need to add, I mean, we still need more discussion on how it's going to get done. And it has not been added to our agenda, which it's past that time to do that. So what's the appropriate time to do that? During discussion after the resolution, or? And then after the motion for the resolution, it'll have to be amended once we figure out how we want to do it.
We probably could have another resolution to implement some direction, for the funding.
Mr. Mayor, I can make some suggestions while you're waiting to get the draft from Allie. What council could do to get it going tonight would be to we need a title for the resolution. It'd be something like approval of resolution number, and it'd be the next one in the list. It'd be number.
Gary, I emailed it to you also. Do you have your?
Oh, okay, good.
Maybe
we're gonna have to split screen for that, but
okay.
Use move a title of a resolution, which whatever you've been receiving, a resolution establishing a small business recovery or assistance program, and that can be the title. Then the motion can continue to say the resolution to direct the establishment of such a program with an appropriation from general fund, I believe, or fund balance.
General fund undesignated.
Thank you. In an amount not to exceed $250,000 to be expended pursuant to eligibility criteria and procedures to be developed by the city manager pursuant to the direction given to the manager by the council at this meeting, because you have been, there's been notes being taken, and you've really covered a lot of the details, with the city manager to commence implementation of the program when those procedures are in place, and to further report to the council for additional direction, modification of the program at the next council meeting, understanding that if you really want to get this going quickly and not wait till the next meeting, that could make that happen. Then doubtless there'll be some experience with the program. It might not even have monies expended yet by the next meeting, but There will be procedures, et cetera, that have been developed. You'll be able to test those a little bit, see those in a more regular council meeting packet. Now that all allows you to even be in the position of potentially expending money before the next council meeting. You could back it up a little and have this motion direct that resolution is approved, creating the program, directing the manager to create the eligibility criteria and procedures, and then to bring that program back to you for approval at your next meeting, which is, I recognize, not starting it right away, but it may be that you'll want to have seen it a little bit in more full detail before you want to trigger the expenditure of funds. And it could well be, I'm almost done here, it could well be that the act of passing the resolution directing that program be established, directing that it be established in the amount of $250,000 will be enough of a signal to the business community that they'll start thinking about what their needs are, gives the manager time to do a more full job on putting together that program. And then when it comes back to you in 2 weeks, you might have only 10% changes. So I think your choices are between directing that it happen right away and come back and we'll tweak it, or directing that it be created and brought back to us and we'll tweak it before we launch it. I've spoken for a long while on behalf of Mr. Goff, and he may have a reaction to those two choices, or there may be other choices.
Additional discussion. Are we ready for a motion? Ms. Hoppy?
I just want to clarify that Councilmember Urban has enough of the language from our city attorney to move forward with this resolution, knowing that what our intention as council is to try to get this program going.
Well, let's go to Mr. Urban right now and ask that question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I would suggest we go with the first option, which is to enact this and get it rolling and come back and tweak it at the next meeting as needed. And so I can read the resolution, turn to Mr. Dahl to provide a little bit more clarity around what he indicated around the establishment of criteria procedure, that language, and then I'll say so moved as it relates to that, and then we'll vote on the resolution.
Mr. Dahl, would you like to formulate some wordsmithing right here for that motion?
Sure. I don't have the title of the resolution as designed by Ally in front of me. Can that be read?
Yeah, I can read that in. So,
great. Why don't you read that in and then I'll read in the details.
Thank you. I move to approve City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado Resolution 19-2020, a resolution amending the fiscal year 2020 general fund budget to reflect the approval of a supplemental budget appropriation in the amount of $250,000 for the purpose of providing a business recovery program. Whereas the Wheat Ridge Charter requires that amendments to the budget be effected by the City Council adopting a resolution, and whereas the City of Wheat Ridge City Council acknowledges the hardship imposed by the COVID-19 emergency, and whereas the council recognizes the importance and significance of small businesses to the health and vitality of Wheat Ridge, and whereas the City Council finds that assistance is necessary to support businesses during this time, and whereas insufficient appropriations in the 2020 budget exist to cover this program, now therefore be it resolved by the City of Wheat Ridge City Council that Section 1, a transfer of $250,000 is hereby approved from the general fund undesignated reserve account 01-005-700-719, and the 2020 revenues are amended accordingly, done and resolved this 30th day of March 2020.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Was there anything else that we needed to get in that resolution? Maybe I jumped the gun, Mr. Dahl.
I'd suggest that you add a section authorizing and directing the city manager to establish such eligibility criteria and procedures for administration of the program as directed by the council during its March 30th, 2020 council meeting, and further to direct the city manager that upon the creation of those eligibility criteria and procedures to initiate payments under the program to eligible businesses, with the requirement that the city manager make a full report to the city council of the progress under the program at the council's next regular meeting.
Mr. Urban, do you incorporate that language by reference into your motion?
And yes, so I would so move the additional language from the city attorney as it relates to this current motion.
Thank you. And the second?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second by Ms. Hoppy. Now, do we have discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, we will go to a vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand.
Mr. Mayor, the motion is passed unanimously.
Thank you very much for a good discussion on item number 4. And I hope our Wheat Ridge businesses will avail themselves of this, and the more so that we can make an investment in our community that helps our community and helps us all. So that's kind of the direction I hope we're headed. We will go to agenda item number 5. Mr. Urban, you added this on the agenda, and I'd like to yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In reference to several emails, I believe that we've all received from constituents who are adjacent neighbors to existing short-term rentals, we've seen concerns from those residents regarding the guests that are residing there from specifically the state of New York and other areas that have been hard hit by the coronavirus. And their concerns are justified in the fact that we now have the CDC indicating that the residents of those states must self-quarantine for 14 days. And it's unlikely that those guests are renting those short-term rentals out for that same period of time. And so I would like to see us enact a 30-day ban on short-term rentals within the city of Wheat Ridge, and if possible, providing an exclusion for first responders or healthcare professionals within that ban, so that we can provide for those employees of our local healthcare facilities a place for them to reside should they need to self-quarantine away from their family. My concern is that when you have a situation like that was brought to us by those residents, where you have a guest from the state of New York, and we know that that's a hot spot, I wouldn't want to put a healthcare professional or other individual in that unit for 14 days regardless. So it is somewhat of a sticky wicket, and I'm not clear on exactly how we should proceed, but I am concerned about the lack of control over this situation, and seeing individuals drive from New York to Wheat Ridge in this circumstance just doesn't seem like it's in our best interest as a city to allow that to continue, especially given the fact that we have first responders and healthcare professionals that need these resources to self-quarantine away from their families.
Do we have discussion among council? Please raise your hand. Mr. Stites.
And maybe this is a good question for Patrick. What, as far as hotels and motels, what's the restrictions right now?
There are none, at least under the state's, under the governor's public health order. Accommodations, hotels and other accommodations are exempt from, they're considered essential businesses. So, but Wheat Ridge as its entity of its own can make, put in stricter enforcement or rules. So, so you could do this if you'd like, even though the state hasn't.
I share Mr. Urban's concerns about this, and I've received the same emails everybody else has, I believe, and had some in-depth conversations with some of those neighbors. But, you know, it's one thing to me when somebody stays in a hotel, motel, something like that, that's in a commercial corridor. There's an expectation, I guess, that you're going to be around a lot of other people. But when you're living in your own neighborhood and you're expecting to have, well, your neighbors around you, and then you've got a revolving door of people who could be coming from any state at this point, we don't know, and could be bringing COVID-19 with them or not. We don't know. There's very little control that we have over that. And I feel like hotels, motels are fairly well regulated in the way they clean. They have cleaning schedules. We don't necessarily know that with some of our short-term rentals. We don't know a whole lot about our short-term rentals as we're trying to do some of our research. I would definitely, I do agree that a 30-day moratorium or a 30-day ban on short-term rentals is probably fair right now. I would be amenable to possibly doing some sort of spoken with a couple of you guys about maybe having some space in between, like a 3-day cleaning period or something like that in between guests, but that doesn't necessarily keep the neighbors as safe and the people going to grocery stores with these people. So I would support a 30-day ban or moratorium.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councilmember Urban and Stites for bringing this up. I have had lots of email messages from last week, also this week, and phone calls, and all mostly coming from the same street, though. But the first thing that I would like to point out is that if someone is in a short-term rental and if they are ill, or if they had some other contagious disease or something, everybody is still supposed to be following the same orders. So just because someone's in a house next to you and they're sick, it doesn't mean that you're going to get sick. And there's lots of people who, everyone should still be washing their hands. Stepping out onto the front step of your house doesn't get your neighbors ill. But what the concerning thing for me is the turnover. And so I personally don't feel like we should close them down for 30 days. And here's a few reasons why. Those properties most likely have mortgages on them and could potentially also be supplementing income for the place where the other people live. And so, that would be taking another business offline. And, we're talking about how desperate our small businesses are currently. And they most definitely wouldn't be able to be eligible for most of this SBA stuff that's out there. While they would hopefully be able to work with their mortgage companies, that would hopefully be able to happen. But so as looking at it as someone that would maybe be a small business, would be considered a small business, that's one reason why I wouldn't want to shut them down for 30 days. But another thing is that I think that everybody should still be doing the safety measures that we're supposed to be doing. However, if let's say someone was in a rental, and whether it's a hotel room or a motel room or an STR, and they're sick, and then they leave, and then the maid goes in or the house cleaner or whatever goes in and cleans, then they're also potentially exposed. And so I personally feel like for all of our rentals, hotels, motels, short-term rentals, that there should be some sort of quarantine, a 3 or 5 day quarantine, and that the cleaners don't even go in there until the quarantine period is over. So when you leave, you have to take all the trash out wherever they say in the hallway, in the trash cans or whatever, and nobody touches the place for 5 days. And then the cleaner goes in there. Because again, it's kind of a trickle down because the cleaners, a lot of them are self-employed, just independent, and they're trying to keep as many clients as they can. And so I completely would understand that they would keep their short-term rental clients, even though they don't know what's going in and out of those places, because it's probably one of the few clients that they're able to keep, because probably not a lot of people are having them come into their house and clean. So there's kind of a trickle down. So the way that I see that you can balance the ball here is by not completely shutting them down, but by doing a quarantine, because I think it's really awful that people that come in may not even know that the people before them were potentially sick, and then they could get sick. And that's in any hotel, motel, or short-term rental. And so that's pretty much where I stand on that.
Okay, I have Ms. Nosler back, and then Ms. Weaver.
Patrick, I just have a question for you on a couple of things. Do we have all of the short-term rentals tracked in the city?
We
Like, do we
don't.
know?
We don't as a city, but you know, we've been having discussions with different companies that can help with that. If the city council does want to establish a short-term rental program, there's companies such as Host Compliance, and they're able to provide us with a list of where our short-term rentals are.
Okay.
We'd probably have to pay for that. If you know, if we're gonna, if you want us to notify all the short-term rentals, or if you're just hoping this word gets out, but if you want us to notify them all, we'd have to work with a company like Host Compliance to see if we can get addresses for all these places.
Right. And then I know there's some email traffic back and forth about just how we're enforcing the stay-at-home ordinance. This is kind of piggybacking off of Councilwoman Hoppy, and that we all should just be following the ordinance to stay home. And I wanted to understand better what the city's doing to enforce that, and you know what neighbors can do to enforce that.
Sure. I was seeing if the chief is still on. It looks like, I don't think he is, but we're basically, as a city, taking more of a soft approach. We're not driving around looking for people violating the ordinance necessarily, or the stay-at-home order. But if we get calls or complaints, or our code enforcement officers and our police officers and parks employees are monitoring the parks and making sure that people are not congregating in groups, and asking them to leave if they are. The Jefferson County Public Health does have a call-in number for complaints, either on businesses or on residential folks too. I think if people are seeing people violating the public health order, they can call the Jefferson County Public Health Department, and they will address the issues themselves too.
Great. I just wanted to also share that, you know, there are a lot of health workers who are using these short-term rentals to work at Lutheran and not expose their families to what's going on. And I think that this is going to be really difficult to differentiate between who's using these short-term rentals and who's from out of state, and you know, getting into that nitty-gritty of all of this. And so that's where my real concern is. I want to make sure that people are able to do their jobs if they are part of the essential duties. So that's it.
I have Ms. Weaver next on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to support what Councilmember Hoppy said. I question the moratorium for all the reasons that Ms. Nosler-Beck just mentioned, but it really is about the spread of the virus. And so for me, it's not just short-term rentals, it's also hotels. And I really like the idea of having a wait period before, if there's any changeover in people staying, that it's 3 or 5 days before anyone can go in there. So we're slowing it, but we're also being conscious, as she mentioned, of the people who are maintaining these short-term rentals as well. And I don't think that affects I mean, it's also safe for the healthcare workers as well that need those. And it doesn't seem like that plan prevents the healthcare workers from getting what they need, but it also creates just some appropriate distance. And I do want to just mention that while yes, there are regulations around cleaning for hotels, they're really not they're not disinfectant level. I'll just say that. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Ms. Dozman in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So many of us have been receiving emails from constituents and also had the opportunity to kind of discuss back and forth. And on one hand, I am receiving some of the emails from Lutheran as far as our incident command goes, and there are some hotels and motels in the area that are offering full floors at a discounted rate to healthcare professionals. And so I do want to keep that in mind as far as the healthcare professionals that are not wanting to expose their loved ones. But I think at one point I had discussed with some of you about, if we're going to be restricting short-term lodging as far as short-term rentals go, then we would have to kind of inevitably apply that to hotels and motels as well. And as we've kind of had this conversation, in my mind, it's one thing to be in a hotel and a motel that's in a commercial district, it's zoned for that use, and then we're having a business such as a short-term rental that is operating in a residential area. We're not regulating them, and maybe that's us having done ourselves a disservice and not addressing this early on and kind of kicking the can down the road because it's been such a divisive topic. But I know it's on our agenda here pretty quick, but for me, the immediate concern is the health and wellness of our communities and the fact that our residents are concerned about travelers, which at this point in time, seems a little asinine to me, but it is what it is. And unfortunately, we're having to legislate for those bad apples and those people that are refusing to adhere to the stay-at-home orders and the advice of the CDC to stay at home and self-quarantine, whether it's for 7 or 14 days. And at this point in time, I think it is, we're regulating and restricting other businesses in our communities to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And I don't think it's too far-fetched. And other communities, including Estes Park and Lyons, Colorado, have put a moratorium on short-term rentals. And I think having it be until April 17th or April 30th, whichever council would prefer, I think is a step in the right direction at this point in time until we can regulate them.
Thank you. I have Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I totally support this 30-day ban. This is a public health and safety issue. One of the families that was in one of these, the short-term rental, did develop symptoms and was going around telling neighbors that, yeah, he probably had it. He conversed with, I guess, a doctor on the computer saying, yeah, you probably do, but they didn't stay in the place. They kept walking around the neighborhood, going to the playground or the parks and things, and then they left. There's mixed messages about how the short-term rental should be cleaned. Jefferson County Public Health states it should be cleaned by CDC guidelines. So how do we know that they are being cleaned like that? We don't. So people coming in, the state is asking people not to go to the mountains, not to go places, but these people are still coming in here and traveling around. So I totally support this. This is a public health issue. These people aren't doing that. They're not staying in the place, especially when they're admitting they have some symptoms like shortness of breath. That's kind of a late thing. And then they just take off and go somewhere else in the state. So that's not being responsible. And these short-term rentals are not licensed. So they might be a business, but they don't pay taxes and things. They're not regulated. So we're talking about short-term rentals in neighborhoods. It's not like on a corridor, whatever. And this particular instance, there's like more than one on the street. So people are coming all the time and they're talking to the neighbors and things. To me, it's a public health safety issue. and banning for 30 days is minimal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Now I'm not muted. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have we received any other complaints or incidents other than this one particular concern? Did anyone knows of?
Mr. Goff?
I don't believe the city itself has. Some council members may have, but it's all in this one unit, I believe, or one block.
Okay. So I agree that, this is a time when our entire lives have been disrupted, and what used to feel like pretty normal neighbor to neighbor interactions no longer feel normal or comfortable. Just yesterday, I was walking my dogs and another dog attacked us, and that required 2 immediate interactions with strangers, like right in my face. And normally I'd be grateful for that. And I was like, oh, we're too close. And so I understand that we have a lot of interactions that are making us question, sort of how our neighborhoods operate. I talked to a couple of short-term rental operators in my district today, just to kind of get a sense what's going on with them. Who are they seeing in their rentals? And one of them has she has a gentleman who was dismissed from the Peace Corps. They called everybody back and they required a 14-day quarantine. So he was able to quarantine in the community, and was really grateful to not be at a hotel or motel where he felt like he'd have greater exposure, because everyone uses the same elevators and stairwells. And then another woman down the street said that we're close to Lutheran, and she said that she actually has a male nurse who's looking at renting out her room long-term as an alternative to going home. So I feel like, if we were to completely ban short-term rentals, I wouldn't want to look at anything. If we're genuinely concerned about public health, to me, short-term rentals and hotels and motels have a lot of the same concerns around, exposure for people who use them. As far as interacting in the community, we're all under the same guidelines, and I would be interested in what the city's actions are to enforce those, which Mr. Goff addressed. So I support Councilwoman Hoppy's suggestion that we have a waiting period between usage turnover. I would find it really hard to enforce allowing short-term rentals for people who are, in the health and medical field and not other people. I don't know how we would possibly enforce that. And I know a lot of people who are looking at alternatives to going home, that a short-term rental is actually, a healthier and safer alternative for them. So I support the turnover of 3 days and letting people wait so that the possibility of exposure is reduced. But for the most part, also, our short-term rentals and our hotels are seeing significant reductions in people anyway, because travel's completely shut down. So we're really looking mostly at local people who are looking at short-term occupancy, whether it's short-term rentals or hotels. Thank you.
Thank you. I will recognize Mr. Stites and then Mr. Urban on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we were to do a 3-day quarantine period in between tenants, could we also do like a minimum stay, like a 14-day stay, so it's not being turned over every couple of days? So if somebody did want to stay because they work at Lutheran or whatever, they could rent the house for the 30 days, or they could rent it for 2 weeks rather than renting it for 3 days and then turning it over for 3 days. Would that help solve that problem? We don't necessarily recognize short-term rentals right now. So I think to Judy's point, we're not collecting any lodging tax. I'm not even sure, do we recognize them as a business? I mean, I know that would be my other question.
Thank you, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, for Patrick, my understanding was that we had paid a $10,000 fee of some kind at some point to that firm to receive a list of a number of 141 comes to mind. We had a map of those that were owned by Priceline, Expedia, and all that in a study packet at one point. So it seemed like we have some kind of data that we paid for at some point. Was that?
We have data just on the number of units we have, but we don't have actual address list. Yeah, we haven't contracted with any company yet. but they have shared with us the information that they've been able to pull from the web on how many units we have, but we don't have addresses.
Okay, so setting that aside, to some respect, talking about the small business aspect of it, every small business is being hurt by this, and it seems somewhat like we're, making the bed while the house is on fire. And we have to be concerned about small businesses, but at the same time, our primary focus, and we're done balancing things, because the primary focus is to stop the spread of this virus. And the short-term rentals is a weak spot in our city specifically, because number one, we do not regulate them, and number two, we don't know where they are, and number three, we have exact instances of individuals coming from a hotspot that the CDC has identified, and that by their exact pattern of leaving after a certain period of time outside of a 14-day window, we've seen that they violated that request to be self-quarantined. So in order to address this matter, I think, to Councilmember Stites' point, if we limited it to a 14-day rental period, to say short-term rentals can exist so long as you book a 14-day rental there, that fits within what our stay-at-home order is from our governor. That fits within what the CDC tells people to do. That's what the city of Wheat Ridge needs to do at this point, as it respects to anybody that wants to be in any spot for any given, anywhere in the city. You have to stay there for 14 days. And I think that is a reasonable accommodation here, because I don't think we're in a position to come up with a particular 3-5 day window for turnaround, because we're not the CDC. We don't know what that really means. There's studies that suggest that this virus can last for up to 17 days on hard surfaces. So the CDC says self-quarantine for 14 days. If you want to come here to Wheat Ridge to self-quarantine and you've got a rental that you want to book for 14 days, go for it. But I feel like this is something that we need to enact, and it's something that we need to take care of as soon as possible.
Ms. Weaver?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just curious how, in any of these scenarios, and this is a question for Patrick, if we don't know where these short-term rentals are, how can we regulate any of this?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are throwing out a lot of different ideas, which I think is a great discussion, and I think Mr. Urban's correct, I don't think anybody on this call is a decontamination expert. Just throwing out a random, 3 or 5 day kind of window between rentals, I don't know if we know that's going to do anything. I suggest, if you guys want to do something like that, that we work with the Jefferson County Health Department, if you want to put in any restrictions such as that. But yeah, you're right, Ms. Weaver. If we get the addresses, we'd have a better chance to regulate it, but we don't necessarily have the capacity to watch these and how they're being rented. And maybe the host compliance, a company that we could contract with, could potentially do some of that for us. I don't know. But yeah, we wouldn't have the capacity to watch these folks and make sure that they're, especially cleaning. Yeah, it would be difficult.
So basically, we'd incur another cost in any scenario of trying to regulate this, correct?
Yeah, it depends on how much. Again, we don't have the resources to put towards it either. I don't have additional cops or code enforcement that is going to go out and monitor these rentals. We just don't have those resources.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to that point, Patrick, in regards to contracting with some sort of host organization to somehow verify these properties, would that be a cost that we would be incurring anyways if we're going to be talking about regulating short-term rentals, since it's coming up on our...
Yeah, and it's pretty minimal. And I think Mr. Urban was right. I can't remember. It was only in like the $10,000 to $20,000 range, I think, to manage kind of almost a whole licensing program for us. So I don't think it's a huge expense, and we could see what a company could do for us in this case if they could monitor and manage a rental scheme during this period. So it's something we could look at.
Thank you. I'll recognize Mr. Stites.
One last thing, just in response to that, and we kind of found this too when we were doing the group homes. We may not know where they are, but the neighbors do. So if the neighbors are reporting this, we can just follow up like any other code enforcement, couldn't we?
Yeah, if you just want to be proactive on it. But we have 150 so units in the city, and at this point, we're only getting one complaint on one unit. So I don't think it'd be very effective. It wouldn't be that widespread if you're just counting on the neighbors to let us know where they are.
Well,
we could definitely
Additional discussion, Ms. Hoppy.
I just want to say that while we're having these conversations, it's really hard for me to hear people who are staying in short-term rentals being referred to as these people that are infecting our neighborhoods. And so I just would really like to kind of steer away from that kind of language as we're talking about it. Again, they're people, they're citizens of somewhere. They're just because they're in a short-term rental doesn't make them a horrible person. And I would like to just mention that your neighbor could be ill and you wouldn't necessarily know it. And if they were out on their front porch catching some fresh air, you're not supposed to be within 6 feet of them. And so, it's kind of the same thing. And so I just kind of want to steer us away from these people narrative, because I think it's heartbreaking and damaging, because I feel like I think it's inappropriate. I'll just start with that word.
Thank you. Recognize Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would come back at that and say that when we talk about these people, and in this particular instance, it's residents of the state of New York who the CDC has designated as a hotspot and who has declared that they must self-quarantine for 14 days. So it's not us saying these people, it's the CDC saying these people. And I don't want to look for license plates. I don't want to isolate or denigrate or otherwise call out individuals for anything other than what the CDC and other governmental agencies have told them they must do. And it doesn't take much to look at this and say, if they're not going to self-quarantine for 14 days, that's a violation of what the CDC told them to do. So I don't want to be insensitive or denigrate anybody else, but it is a fact that the CDC told individuals from New York to self-quarantine. We have individuals that have driven here from New York, and these individuals made the mistake of telling the neighbors their business. And a lot of other short-term rentals probably aren't out there talking to people, and that's good. But we just don't know what we don't know. And that's, we've seen other municipalities and other local governments quarantining and closing and shutting down short-term rentals. And I think given Wheat Ridge's high population of elderly people and our close proximity to the mountain community, which has closed down a lot of the short-term rentals, puts a lot more pressure on our community for short-term rentals. And those are some of my reasons. It would be the same reason if Denver closed down all of their marijuana dispensaries. I would ask us to consider doing the same thing, because it puts extra pressure on ours. So as we see other communities close down their short-term rentals, that extra pressure being put on us is difficult to handle, especially in this time frame. And so it's not some situation where we're trying to denigrate anybody. It's trying to follow what the CDC has told us to do.
Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question. So this is a little tangential, but so I have a neighbor who had a medical event that was unrelated to COVID-19 and is housebound, and his family has driven from California to come stay with him while he is recovering. And I know this because I've seen them in the street and we've talked. Does the city have any resources or anything, around if I was concerned that they're not abiding by the quarantine or 6-foot distancing? I mean, it seems like the concern is we've got people coming from other communities and are embedding themselves in our community and may not be aware of the state's regulations or self-quarantine recommendations. And if those are our legitimate concerns, which are real health concerns, I mean, this is a public health crisis. It is scary to walk around the neighborhoods right now. I'm curious, do we have any tools as a city to enforce that?
Again, first of all, I think the public health order allows for travel to take care of relatives. So I think that's okay for somebody to come from out of state if they're taking care of a family member. I believe that's in the order. But no, I mean, we're not gonna, first of all, I don't know how we would know. I guess if you're calling us and telling us to check on that person, we're not gonna do that. We would ask you to call the health department, and the health department would investigate that.
Okay, thank you. I guess my closing is I feel like we're having an important policy discussion, and we are all trying to navigate what does community interaction look like in the age of this unprecedented health event. I'm just really concerned about making a policy decision on an agenda item that wasn't posted and we weren't able to get much input on. We're talking about a policy decision on a single incident that is concerning and that the city should be able to respond to in some capacity, but I'm uncomfortable, historically when we have made policy decisions based off a single incident by, a group of specific neighborhoods, we often find out then it just isn't necessarily, serving our whole community. So I would be more interested in getting a little bit more input before doing any like overarching bans. I'm open to other suggestions, but I'm just not super comfortable with policy decisions based off of single incidents with not a lot of verified information.
Additional discussion. Ms. Hoppy.
I'd just like to say thank you to Councilwoman Hulteen for kind of putting that into words for me. There have definitely been times when I've been sitting on the dais and it's a hurry up, we need an emergency this or an emergency that, and when we have had a little bit more time and more discussion, then we're able to come up with something that is much more robust and inclusive of the city as a whole. And so I would like for this to move to another meeting and for us to have an opportunity for the staff to give us a memo on it and for us to have a more defined discussion around it. And I won't be voting tonight for 30 days. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't in the future. I just feel like we need more information and conversation about it.
Thank you. I'll recognize Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in the event that this is an evolving health crisis that we're constantly having to kind of pivot and adapt to in real time, I just want to recognize that this is a temporary moratorium. This isn't a complete ban of short-term rentals. We have placed a lot of businesses and restricted a lot of businesses for the sake of preventing the spread of this pandemic in our community. And I wouldn't say that putting a moratorium on new guests in short-term rentals we can say April 17th, April 30th, or 30 days. I mean, the stay-at-home order is until April 17th. And so if we just go along with that and then give ourselves permission to either extend it if necessary or bring it to further discussion beyond that point, that's fine. But I think that this is a concern that we are seeing right now in real time and need to thus address it in that manner.
Thank you. Additional discussion, Mr. Urban.
I'll let Val go ahead. Sorry.
Ms. Nosselbeck.
Thanks. Just a question. So if the moratorium went into place now, so if we were to do something like you mentioned, Councilwoman Dozeman, would it be in effect immediately? Like what would happen to the people who were in the short-term rental now? Would we be requiring them to stay for 14 days or I don't understand if this is an urgent type thing, I just want to know how it would be implemented.
So I feel like much like the stay-at-home order that has been issued by the county and then the state, we would put out a press release and have it go into effect either the following day or 24 hours at this point in time. If we were to put it into effect by April 1st and say through April 17th, and to be in line with the stay-at-home order of the state, and then to be extended as necessary. And then if we need to have further discussion at that point in time, we can. But I mean, I don't see it as any different than other government agencies issuing stay-at-home orders or restrictions on businesses.
Mr. Urban, I had you next, but Ms. Hoppy has a question. Are you ready to go, or you want to defer? Recognize Ms. Hoppy.
The current stay-at-home order from the governor that's until the 11th. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Likely going to get extended.
So,
Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think to the question of the logistics of this, when the governor instituted a ban on dine-in restaurants, he didn't provide a list of all the restaurants in the state and say, this is how it's done. He just said, this is what we have to do. And this is an emergency. While this was not on the agenda yesterday, Mr. Goff did provide an email to council asking for direction from council on this issue. And you're right, from a policy perspective, we haven't had a whole lot of time to deal with this. And I agree, I'm not looking to spring this on everybody. I'm just trying to deal with this in the sense that it is a state of emergency, literally. So I will make a motion, and if there's amendments or anything else to that anybody would like to consider, I'd be interested in that, and we'll go from there. So I move to ban the rental of residential property within the city of Wheat Ridge for less than a 14-day period to be in effect from April 1st to April 30th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on the motion? Ms. Weaver.
You're on mute.
Thank you. So I just want to understand, this is not a moratorium on new rentals. This is a moratorium on anything less than a 14-day stay. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Zach, did you say 30 or 14 or 30 days?
Well, it's a 30-day period in which people cannot rent for less than a 14-day period.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they can.
Go ahead, Ms. Weaver.
So they can continue to rent. It just has to be for a 14-day stay in this period, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hoppy. You
Thank
don't
you,
have
Mr. Mayor. No, I'm fine.
Okay, you're okay. Is there further discussion on the motion? Ms. Hulteen.
I realize this might have been a question for staff, but if this does not pass, does regulating short-term rentals fall under the emergency ordinance that we granted the powers for the city manager to make that decision?
Yes. But I wanted council direction. So that's why we're discussing it this evening. Yeah, the Mr. Dahl and I discussed this in the declaration of an emergency does give me the authority and power to shut these down.
Thank you. Additional discussion on the motion, Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Would this include anything to deal with healthcare workers, just with Lutheran being here? I know we had discussed that before. Is there an exemption?
We do have examples of that too, if that's something you want to do from the other cities. Some cities have exempted as long as the housing is being used for first responders or such. That's something that other cities have done.
Additional discussion on the motion.
And I'll
Urban.
I would be amenable to a motion relative to healthcare workers and first responders and the like. I would suspect that they would want a 14-day stay, but I don't want to necessarily dictate that either. But My purpose and reason behind providing a 14-day window is that falls within the CDC's guidelines around self-quarantines. If individuals want to self-quarantine within the city of Wheat Ridge, I think that's perfectly fine. But my concern is that we have rentals that are happening for one day and then they move out and someone else moves in, and that is concerning to me. So right now, as it stands, the motion is just simply for 30 days. If you want to rent a short-term rental within the city of Wheat Ridge, you have to book a 14-day period.
Additional discussion on the motion. Are you ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion, raise your hands.
All opposed, raise your hand. Mr. Mayor, the motion is passed 5-3 with Ms. Hoppy, Ms. Hulteen, and Ms. Nosler Beck voting no.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Goff, that gives you the direction.
Yep.
To proceed.
We'll get that out tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. That concludes our agenda items for tonight. I would like to go to Mr. Goff for city managers matters.
Yeah, maybe just real quickly, due to the hour, I did hear from Lutheran Hospital today, and for the most part, things are going well at this point at the hospital. They are, they are asking if people are interested in donating supplies, that they can do that. And the best place to do is to go to the sclhealth.org website, and there's information on there about donating masks or any other things that people can donate. Lutheran is, because of HIPAA and privacy concerns, they're not speaking about if they have any patients with COVID or not. The health department is releasing that information. But at this point, they believe they currently have the bed capacity, and they're working on planning for a patient surge if that happens in the next couple weeks. So the good news is, I think at this point Lutheran is ready for anything and are prepared. So thank you.
Thank you. City attorney's matters, Mr. Dahl.
Nothing tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll go to elected officials matters, and I'll start with Ms. Nosler Beck.
Thanks, Mayor. Real quick, I just wanted to echo some of the comments from the public comment time. Just that this platform, I love being able to do it from our house, but I heard from a couple of constituents that it didn't seem very accessible to them. So it'd be great if we could just hear some more about other platforms or ways that we can be communicating with folks out there. And then also, I was just hoping, I also got a couple notes about postponing agenda items until we can have the platform figured out that we want to do that. So thanks, everybody. It's good to see everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know I'm going a little stir crazy at home. I'm hopefully going to be able to return to work here and there. And I know that all parents are eternally grateful for those teachers with having to navigate the remote learning oftentimes for multiple age groups. So it's been quite the interesting learning curve for myself and my family in navigating that uncharted territory. So I just want to thank everybody for showing up here. It's good to see all of your faces, and I want to just kind of reiterate to the community that we're all in this together. And I know these are hard times, and we don't really know what to expect and are kind of just taking things day to day. But if anybody needs to reach out just to talk or FaceTime or anything, I'm here. So thank you.
Thank you, and take care. Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to kind of echo what Val had asked and maybe ask a question of Ms. Hoppy and Patrick. What kind of disruption to our schedule would it be if we did take off some of those public hearings that we have for rezonings, possibly from maybe the, was it the 13th? Would that totally disrupt our schedule if we push those back a couple weeks till hopefully we can meet in person again?
Well, it really doesn't disrupt the city schedule. It disrupts those applicants' schedules. And, you know, they have money and time into these projects. And so I'm assuming they wouldn't be too thrilled about that. But if that's something council wants to do, I can't remember what the public hearings on the next meeting. I think there's one for the Clear Creek Crossing project for the Lutheran Hospital project. There's a public hearing on there for that. And Janice, I don't know if you remember what the second one
Yeah,
is.
there's
Johnson
there's
Street.
ordinance rezoning for 9800 West 38th. There's an ordinance vacating a portion of right of way for I-70 frontage road on Clear Creek development, and then the planned mixed use Clear Creek crossing outline.
And also maybe to speak also a little bit to the, I get it. Not everybody may not have this technology skills, and I think Mr. Dahl and I were talking about that today. It's the older we get, the less intuitive some of these platforms are, and I understand that. But I think we've provided many different opportunities for citizens still to participate. I get it. It's not, you can't come to a council chambers and maybe see the same type of information that you might have in the past, but people can just call in on a phone, and they don't have to have a computer. They can call in and still make comments and still listen. Yeah, they may not be able to see visual documents. And, you know, we are using the Wheat Ridge Speaks to put the full council packets on there too. Again, you have to have a computer for that, but that's something that you don't have to do at the night of the meeting. You have several days that you can view that information. So we're trying to do it as much as we can during this situation. I do understand it, but I am concerned about delaying some of these public hearings because we do have property owners who have been waiting for this public hearing date. We could put off, we could maybe continue at least with ones that are scheduled and maybe not schedule any others if that's what council would like. But there are some that are scheduled that we have applicants and property owners counting on getting a decision made.
Thank you, Patrick. I mean, mostly I just wanted to, and you already did it, was list off the ways that the public can still give feedback. Wheat Ridge Speaks. They can still call in the day of the meeting. They can still be on the Zoom meeting. Is there another one that I missed?
Yeah, I think Allie's still listening. Allie, can you chime in? Are you still on there? Have we missed anything?
No, I think so. They can see it on Channel 8, watch it on YouTube Live like normal. They can comment on Wheat Ridge Speaks. They can, of course, email you all, and that could be read into the record. They can call in over the phone and Zoom in. And then Councilor Hulteen had a suggestion that we actually conduct some trainings for the public. And I suggested that it would be great for us to get through tonight's meeting just to make sure that we are obviously looking for your feedback on how this was for you all. But now that we know, I think what worked, we could definitely work on putting together some training, a number of different training sessions at different times of the day and different days of the week for the public to help them prepare.
I think that would be awesome. And if we could set those up as like Facebook events and then invite people to them or something like that, that would be a great way to maybe get some more people involved in that. But just moving on, thank you, Patrick and Allie and everybody else for that. Thank you guys tonight for a great discussion. Miss you guys, miss seeing everybody. And it's exciting to see all the businesses and all the people in the community coming together and really working hard for each other. And I've been impressed by seeing the restaurants and other businesses change their business dynamics like in a night and adapt to this. So and I appreciate groups like Local Works giving out loans to people to help them adapt through these changes. So thank you, and thank you for all the hard work, guys.
Thank you. We'll go now to Ms. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank the city for, I mean, I think all of us have as Mr. Seitz said, have been converting our lives to what this looks like. And I just wanted to thank the city for doing this so quickly, and just ask everybody for patience with themselves and in learning this new technology. It's pretty. I mean, for a moment, it's been 2 weeks, and here we're sitting here online talking to each other. That's pretty amazing. It'll get better, and I think I just wanted to thank the city for being really responsive amidst not being in your offices or anything like that. So so thank you, and we'll all keep working on this.
Thank you. We'll recognize Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to echo what has already been a lot of expression of thanks to our city staff. I just want to call out in particular Ali Sheck, who I know has really scrambled to make the back end work, as she always does with the city. So thank you for doing it well and doing it with a smile. That's greatly appreciated. A couple of other things I just want to mention. As I said, I've been talking to a lot of business owners. Several of our restaurants have adapted to the new orders, but we also have a lot of great online retailers who are still able to provide great products and online. So I know the city's working on that, but I'd encourage our citizens just to take advantage of our retailers who have shifted to an online presence and are able to, you know, provide free shipping and get stuff that's still within our zip code and still supporting our community. I also want to thank the handful of businesses who took the time to provide input on Wheat Ridge Speaks. I think the information you provided is really helpful, and I hope we've all had a chance to take a look at that. And then I guess I should have done this as a sandwich with like the two positives with the sort of naggy reminder in the middle. As I mentioned earlier, I was out walking my dogs yesterday, and we've all been out walking our dogs. I've loved seeing all the neighbors out, the families out. It's in some ways kind of delightful despite the circumstances. I have seen an inordinate amount of off-leash dogs, and these are dogs that I'm sure people think they have the best and the nicest and the best trained dogs. However, we were attacked by a dog who ran from, you know, the front porch with the family right there, almost got hit by a car. And so I just want to remind everyone, your dog is really wonderful. I love all dogs, but please keep your dog on a leash. They're still animals and respond differently, and there's a lot more strangers and new dogs out. So just a friendly reminder, keep your dog's leash so we can all enjoy walking our neighborhoods and keeping our 6-foot distance. I look forward to our next council meeting. I've missed everybody too.
Thank you. I will go to our city treasurer, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. I'm on the City of Wheat Ridge website. If you were to click on that, I'm going to show everyone where you can find that form for the extension to file your sales taxes. I found it, and Janice, you're right. Sometimes it's difficult to find things. But on top, there's this banner. If you look on COVID-19 updates, click on that. Give it a moment to load. Business continuity and support is over here on the left. And the first item on the bullet right here has a link to the form. I will work with the economic development team / Steve Art to make this a little bit more well-known to the public and give them an opportunity to take advantage of this program. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And I think that is all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Miller. We'll go now to Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Councilmember Hulteen's point about dogs being off leash, I've noticed that as well. And I think that's in some ways a testament to our city that that's one of the largest problems that we have right now, and how well our residents have responded to this unprecedented event, and that they've done fairly well in dealing with this. And if that's the issues that we're dealing with, then I think we're doing pretty good. Not to say that I haven't noticed that as well. I'd like to thank our city staff who's done an amazing job, both from at City Hall and dealing with everything that still has to be done to serve the public, but also our parks and maintenance workers out there taking care of our parks, doing an amazing job. And I was out riding my bike today, and one of the bike paths I was on was recently swept, and that felt good to know that we were taking care of the business of being a city. And just yesterday, I spent some time at Lutheran Hospital caring for a neighbor of mine, an elderly gentleman who was 84 years old, and he was his family's out of town. So I spent some time at Lutheran, and just having to be in that situation, taking care of him, gave me a very small sense of the amount of courage it takes to be a healthcare worker right now and being in that environment. And I just want to thank our healthcare workers for the amount of courage and strength that it takes to clock in every day and take care of our community in that way. And that also goes to our police force, who is also there taking care of our community at Lutheran. And so I appreciate everything that our police force is doing to keep us safe, and especially the work they're doing at Lutheran and being there as well. And then for our business community, I think tonight we took a great step in the right direction to show our community that we are there for our business community and that we are nothing without our business community. And so I'm looking forward to seeing this business recovery plan roll out. And I'd last like to thank us as a city council and thank each member of council here for the willingness and ability to work through this new platform, and for us to all get along and figure out how to navigate this and come up with the best solutions to deal with the situation as we can, and trying to listen to all the different concerns that come out and do it on this new platform is amazing. So thank you all for coming together and dealing with this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go now to Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. We are in very confusing times. We don't know what's going on from one day to the other, but we still need 100% compliance on social distancing and staying at home except for essential errands and walking, and continue with good hand washing. I've also seen dogs off leash, and it is concerning. There's also a lot of little kids that are walking around, and you just never can totally trust what a dog is going to do. But with all the people that are walking dogs, and I walk my dog, please be respectful and not have your dogs go 6-8 feet onto people's lawns to go to the bathroom. Toilet them before you walk them, toilet them after you get done. And they don't have to do that. That's just being respectful. And I do want to thank all the personnel that are working in healthcare, the first responders, the grocery people. I know I've heard Wheat Ridge being referred to as a grocery store community. Well, aren't we lucky that we have grocery stores? And my mailman, I love my mailman, the sanitation guys, the restaurant people, and even the people who are repairing cars. They're still working. They're doing a business. So I just want us to be safe, but also be smart. Okay, because we don't know how long this is going on, and to just think, oh, it's not a big deal, being in groups, and this is serious. So just everybody be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go down to Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few things. So I was out enjoying our open space this weekend, and I was fortunate that the trail I was on only had about 6 other people on it, or I only saw 6 other people, and they were not even close to 20 feet from me. However, it was hard to remind my children that park benches and handrails over bridges and stair rails are what I kept calling contamination stations. And so I've been asking them, please stay away from the contamination station. So I just like to remind people that when you are out in the open space, that please have respect for everybody, so we can all continue to enjoy our outside. Make sure that you are having good space. If you do happen to be on a narrow trail and there's someone in front of you, don't pass them. If someone's coming the opposite direction, then, please, whoever has the more ability to step off the edge of the trail so that the other one can pass, keep that in mind and be respectful of that. Another thing I wanted to say is the Jeffco Business and Workforce Center and the Jeffco Business Resource Center are having a Zoom meeting webinar called COVID-19 Funding Options for Small Businesses. And that's on Friday, April 3rd from 9 to 10:30. And if you go to the Business Resource Center website, then it'll show you how to sign up for it. It's free. Registration closes at 7 a.m. on April 3rd for that. And if you need more information about that, then feel free to email me and I can shoot you the link, or the contact person they have listed is Naveen Laughlin at the Jeffco Business Workforce Center. And that's 720-878-7637 if you have any questions about that. And then lastly, something I'm super excited to tell everybody about. Councilmember Stites and I are working on a small project. It's something that I would attribute to something like a flash mob, only this flash mob is going to last for a week, and it's going to be flash gift card sales drives for our small businesses of Wheat Ridge. So it'll be a 1-week event only. It'll be from April 6th to the 12th. And it's going to be, you can purchase gift cards for $20. The small businesses will offer you $25 in goods or services in return, and they're only good from June 2020 to June 2021. So here's the deal. If you're a small business and you want to participate, what you need to do is email myself, Jay Hoppy, or Corey at ki.wheatridge.co.us. You can also find our emails on the city website, and let us know that you want to be involved, and we'll just give you, there's only just a few parameters that we need. We need to know how can people buy the gift card from you. We need to know what kind of products and services you offer, and we need you to be able to utilize your own contact list and social media to promote the event, regardless if you're featured on that day. So easy peasy, keeping it simple, and we're hoping that we can get some sales drive to some of our local smaller businesses for that week. So that's all I have. I hope everybody can stay safe and be well.
Thank you. I believe we've had everybody had a chance to speak, and I'm going to make it brief because I have my battery is running low. Screen has come up, and we're almost 3 hours into a meeting that we haven't had a break on. So I want to tell you that we are in unusual times. I am very proud of our citizens about how we've come together as a community. I think everyone, if they haven't taken this COVID-19 virus seriously, they need to. I think we need to take the governor and the health department orders very literal. Stay home, sequester yourself, and let's stay safe in this environment. I think we will come out of this. I think we will come out stronger. I think there are a lot of lessons here that we're going to learn. I want to thank our city staff and our city officials for coming together and developing this online platform. I know it's not perfect. I know there are kinks to work out, but I appreciate everybody putting their shoulder to the plow and pulling this through, because I think if we need to be open as a city. I'm really proud of the leadership that we've had on the state and the county level, and our local officials gathering together on this. We may be in an emergency situation, but we're not in a crisis. We've got good leadership leading us. I think that we need to pay attention to our public health officials and respect these orders. And I think if we do that, we will come out better and faster than we would otherwise if we didn't. So thank you for all sort of joining us in. And I think, we're the home of the farmers. So if we're shouldering the plow together, that may be a good analogy to leave you with. If there's no other business to come before the council, then we will stand adjourned. And thank you. And I believe we have a study session set for next week. I haven't gotten the details, but I assume that we're sort of back on this platform and keep a lookout for this information. Thank you all for being here. And with that, we will adjourn and say good night. Good night.